Okay, so let's do Adam's Rib.
So I picked Adam's Rib because, and we're spoilers for Adam's Rib and
And
any
anything we
other,
might talk about.
right? Because I know that Spencer Tracy and Katherine Hepburn were in a number of movies together, and I'm not really well versed on either of them, as far as these things go. It's also directed by George Cukor, who I feel like we may have even discussed before.
I don't know, remember, because
He was a director for a long time.
yeah,
Um,
he was early Hollywood, I think 30s to 50s maybe is his range roughly, maybe a little more than that.
mhm.
He's kind of famous for well, I think he was openly gay, or openly,
Yeah,
sexually free of some kind. I think it was gay specifically, but
yeah.
and he still made movies and was a fairly popular guy, and he gets mentioned as having, I think he's one of the guys who had like good parties or something, I think was George
Yeah,
Cukor's
and
thing.
I feel like he had a reputation that, and we're going with outdated stereotypes here, but because he was a gay man, I think the way women were handled in his movies and kind of that kind of focus was kind of different from what
I've heard
heterosexual male at the time would have been,
I've
you
heard
know.
critics talk about this very thing, how like his women, I mean, maybe they're not perfect, and again, it is still like they're
Mhm.
more liberated in that area than you might think, and even some of them in a way where they could almost belong in the present day. But
Yeah,
like I think the Criterion even did a section called Cukor's Women, and yeah,
yeah.
they had 3 or 4 movies up there, and I didn't catch it. But so like so it's interesting from that, but also, and maybe you're about to get to this, Ruth Gordon. This is written by Ruth Gordon and Garson Kanin. I don't know Garson Kanin that well, but Ruth Gordon goes on to star in Harold and Maude, right?
Right. And she's also in Rosemary's Baby. And this
She's
is much later in her life.
Yeah. So she's kind of a well-known Hollywood
Well, and she and Garson Kanin were married, so they're a married
mm,
couple
okay.
um, doing this. Oddly enough, she's the older one, which is,
Not usual.
especially the further back you go, I feel like.
Yeah.
But yeah, and also in case, I mean, we're assuming people know Spencer Tracy and Katherine Hepburn were famously a couple, but they were never married because Spencer Tracy was already married and very Catholic. So however that logic worked, he could be in a relationship with Katherine Hepburn for decades, but not divorce his wife. And that is how that works, I guess. Don't ask.
For the record, if this is your first thing you're seeing of us, we were raised agnostic. I know Catholic of the 3 big ones, which are the Abrahamic religions. I know more about being Jewish because of my own heritage, Muslim because my best friend is Muslim, than I do about being Catholic. Although I
Well,
did have a
my
Catholic girlfriend
my
for a while.
significant other went to Catholic high school, and knows more
My
about it
ex,
than.
one of my exes was Catholic, so I know a
Yeah,
little bit.
but I mean, but this is the facts of their relationship, to be perfectly honest. And I'm not trying
Yeah.
to say anything about Catholicism, but more about Spencer Tracy and his interpretation of it.
Yes.
Um, so I don't know which movies of theirs came first. I don't know.
Well, and for both you and me, I post on Instagram. I post on Instagram when we watch these movies. And I posted this was my first Spencer Tracy, Katherine Hepburn, and technically that's a lie because I've seen Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which was
Right,
the last movie they made. Last Spencer Tracy's last movie. He died days after it. He was very sick when they were making it.
right.
And and I've seen that, and you've seen that, but I think that was the only one we've seen, you and me have seen, where they were together in the movie. And I kind of don't. It's not one of their rom-coms or anything. It's a
Right.
a social political. It's a social commentary movie, which
With Sidney Poitier and stuff
Sidney
like, yeah.
Poitier. Yeah. So this was my first ostensibly a rom-com between Spencer Tracy and Katherine Hepburn.
Right. And I believe they'd done others before. I mean, if this is Pigeon Verite at our finest. We don't know much about what we're talking about when it comes to this. I think I picked this one in part because it has Judy Holliday in it, and I really liked her in Born Yesterday and wanted to see her in something else, and she's really good in it.
Yeah.
So we've talked all about this. Your turn to do the plot.
Excellent. Okay, so Spencer Tracy and Katherine Hepburn both play lawyers. They seem to be, I think he's a district attorney and she might be prosecution. Um, did I get that
We
confused?
he's definitely a district attorney, but she's just a lawyer.
She's just a lawyer, right?
If you're going to go up against the district attorney, you are prosecution, but you could also go up against other lawyers who aren't district attorneys. This is my understanding. This is my understanding of how it works. I could be wrong.
They're both lawyers, and he seems to be a district attorney. And the movie opens with Judy Holliday shooting a gun sort of at her cheating husband, Tom Ewell, who we saw earlier this year, late last year, in 7 Year Itch. Poor guy is not playing roles that I particularly care for. And they end up, Spencer Tracey ends up with the case, and he has to, he's trying to find Judy Holliday's character guilty of attempted murder, I think. And meanwhile, Katherine Hepburn decides to take up Judy Holliday's case because it's about, it's okay if a man does something like this, he's protecting his family, but if a woman does it, she's gone crazy or whatever. Now the movie then continues, and there's relationship strife because of the case, and stuff happens, and it's sort of about gender roles and women's rights, and that's kind of it. And in a rare move for you and me, you asked our mother. I didn't think about it, but I would have if I had, to watch and try to explain it to us, because she's not the age of this movie. She was born 5 years later, but it is close enough to her that she understands it better than we do.
Well, it's funny because you often are a little historically clueless, to the point where unless you're looking at bell bottoms, and even then, what decade do bell bottoms belong in, Theo?
70s?
Good, but you heard how long he paused before he answered, right? He was not confident when he said it. So this is what I'm dealing with. But
so much disdain in her voice.
Yeah, I mean, although I'll be honest, when it comes to things like noirs, I think you have a better grasp on kind of where they fit in. And actually, I was thinking, I forgot until now that this is a post World War II rom-com. Yes. I wouldn't say Neptune's Daughter was, even though it's from the same year. No. But this one, when we were talking, I also struggled to really figure out where this fits. And I don't usually have that much of a problem with rom-coms.
Well, and I even, while we're watching it, I'm asking you, is this a rom-com? I have trouble with comedy often. So I'm it's not even really just that, but it's
right.
I couldn't tell what the jokes were. I can usually tell what the jokes were, and I just don't laugh because I don't find them funny, but I was so lost.
But that was one of the more interesting things. So our mom really did help us center this better. And in a way, we made her feel better about where the world has gone, because it really is kind of a post-war film, because during World War II, the men were at war, the women started doing men's, I'm doing air quotes because, this is just how it was considered at the time, work. They worked in factories, they drove cars, they did, Marilyn Monroe, I think, got kind of her start in a factory too. This would become more, because her husband was away.
Yes, that's all correct. Yeah, she worked in a factory, and so they did a calendar or something, I think.
Right. I don't think that wouldn't have been during the war, but that would have just been he was in the military. Maybe. But anyway, so then the men come back, and now we have this weird issue where all these things that we thought I wasn't alive at the time, but culturally were clear, women stay in the home, men go work, get the money, take care of the ladies. That's not true anymore, but they try to make it true again. And it doesn't really work, because it turns out some of the women liked being independent and liked, doing that and so on. So then, whereas before in the 30s, you kind of weren't thinking about these things. Men were men and women were women. And of course, people were thinking about these things, but I'm talking in broad cultural terms. So that wouldn't show up in the rom-com. It's kind of interesting in Ninotchka, but I think that's kind of because Lubitsch and Wilder were more progressive people. Wilder came from Berlin in the 30s, and that was a very non-traditional kind of a background. So you had that kind of stuff.
when it's not too surprising. I think this is how it works in the modern era. You tend to look back at the directors you feel fit your era more, such as Wilder and probably Lubitsch. They were a little more progressive, and so their movies resonate more now than, say,
Right,
Neptune's
totally.
Daughter.
Well, and I think the same goes, even though, it happened one night and was popular, very popular at the time. I think part of the reason we still talk about it is exactly what you're talking about there, because there's plenty of things that were really popular in their time that we don't talk about anymore.
Yeah.
So anyway, where was I going with all this? So this is kind of the first one we've really looked at that comes after that time of kind of gender upheaval, let's call it, for lack of a better word. And so the movie is a battle of the sexes, which is
In of itself
inherently
dated. Yeah, that's even dated now.
It's dated now, but that's what it was. And it was so non-specific that you and I think were really confused, because it's like,
Sure.
Also, I mean, I was thinking it's pre Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I mean, honestly. Right. And so it just, what really stuck with me, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot again, so I'm gonna let you go in a moment, but what really stuck with me that our mom had said was that even asking the question of, are women treated equally? What does it mean? Should they be held to different, even asking that question was kind of a big deal. Whereas, I'm like, but what are we talking about specifically? Are we talking about this legal? Like, no. Just asking that question was a big deal. But for us, it was odd I think, to see Spencer Tracy's character's reaction to it and so on.
Yeah, they said they're setting this thing up where Spencer Tracy's sort of so Tom Ewell is playing the husband who cheats on Judy Holliday, and Spencer Tracy is sort of playing a character who we're sort of seeing get more and more towards where Tom Ewell's character is, or no, to where Judy Holliday's character is. It's a little confusing, but it's like, it's this weird thing that they're doing with that, because like he's getting a little more and more crazy, because maybe that's like men, like here we are, men getting more crazy about women in the workforce and asserting their independence. And I it's that thing where, like, when we watched it, I was very confused. I ultimately enjoyed it, but not really. This is more of a historical text to me, like, of a movie than really entertaining. Like, I wasn't entertained by almost any of the jokes. I only understood what a few of the jokes were, and then I did laugh at a couple things. And I was kind of like trying to figure out how these characters were interacting and what it was trying to mean. So it's like a puzzle. And that's kind of when I refer to things as historical documents, or one of the reasons, because it's like, it's so far behind us that I can't really imagine someone watching this and being like, yes, I just love the way they interact. Now, again, everything's subjective, but it really is like, this is a piece of like, okay, this was, progressive for the time, as you say. So when, Spencer Tracy towards the end of the movie, when he's got that gun, but it's actually just licorice, and God, he takes a huge bite of that thing too. And it's like just black licorice or something. It's like, whoa, I don't know. I'm not that into black licorice.
I like black licorice. This has come up twice in the last 2 days. I like black licorice, but apparently people don't like it.
It's okay.
But I don't know that I'd take off that big a bite of it, but yeah.
Yeah, anyways, I'm trying to look up so Gentlemen Prefer Blondes is like 4 years later, right. 1953. And like, I was trying to even thinking, so he takes a big bite of that gun, and it's like, he's like scaring them with the weapon, and it's like, that's really like, I mean, that's trauma. Like, we understand trauma now a lot better than we did, I think, in 1949. I think that's safe to say. And
but he uses it as like a legal point, and it's like, but that's
yeah, like, so no. Yeah, so so here's where it's like,
by the way, I'm completely wrong. Marilyn Monroe's husband was totally in World War II. I'm just bad with dates. Excuse me, I apologize.
I thought so. Anyways, because she was just famous for years, kind of as like a model, almost more than as an actress.
I forgot how long it took her to really get started, because you think of her as just being so successful, you forget that there were years where she wasn't. Anyway, I apologize.
All good. So like 4 years later, we have Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and you and I, when we talked about it, we talked about how it's actually kind of more progressive, because they want rich husbands and they go for it and they get it. Now, it isn't probing, and like, this is maybe one of those things where it's like, by omission, is it less progressive because they aren't even questioning if they want jobs? At the same time, the whole point, at least for you and me, and the way that we view this, is that it's all about what the person wants. As long as it's, I suppose the limit is like, it can't be harming other people, it can't be destructive to another person, like physically or emotionally or mentally. Like that's where we draw the line. As long as you want something, or like whatever your fetish is, whatever your career desire, whatever
as long
desire
as
is,
the people involved can and are able to consent and do so.
Yeah, like that's, and so in Gentlemen for Blonde, it's weirdly more progressive, maybe because we aren't even asking that question, and they are just going for what they want, and they're not. I mean, in what is it? How to Marry a Millionaire? Like, there's this whole joke about Marilyn Monroe's character being kind of dumb, but she's not. She's she's got her own kind of intelligence. Maybe she doesn't know, I don't know, some of the complicated, whatever, but like she's smart about how to get what she wants. So like this movie, I'm bringing it back around, like this movie feels weirdly less progressive because it's asking these questions and the answers almost seem to be go back to being a housewife. Now that's not completely, because the whole point at the end is that they've reached some sort of impasse, even though it seems like Spencer Tracy maybe has won. Like that's where the tone was really confusing, and why when Mom explains it, it's like, oh, I kind of get it more. But like without Mom's explanation, it's like they're at an impasse kind of, except kind of Spencer Tracy's one. He cried in a manipulative way to show that men could cry. And it's like unique because, a man cried, and because a woman's a lawyer and a high powered lawyer of some kind. She's still taking care of him, but like he's not completely a louse. He's kind of not a fun person, but not, complete. And so it's like, and that he's going to potentially run as a Republican, and she's saying about running as a Democrat, which I think means, I think that's taboo now at this point, which honestly is fine, but like that's interesting to see that with our current political era. And so like all of this has left me in this weird place where it's like it is progressive for asking the questions and for having her character be a high-powered lawyer, and specifically some of the arguments she's making. That one scene where it's just her listening to Judy Holliday talk about it, like that's kind of a progressive scene. Like there's all these moments where I kind of get why it would have been progressive at the time, yet Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and How to Marry a Millionaire oddly feel more progressive to me now, because it's really more about desire of a character and less about like a weirdly manipulative couple trying to come to some sort of resolution on what a woman's rights are via a case where a woman, definitely is shooting a gun at someone, and that's, trying to commit harm on someone.
Right. Okay. So I totally agree with you, and I don't want to like repeat anything you said. I did want to kind of highlight that, part of the joy of this movie though is seeing women interact, Judy Holliday and Katherine Hepburn mainly, which I don't think we've really seen in any of the other rom-coms. But yes, it's confusing because it's not really coming up with answers. It's just asking questions, and we're kind of past that now. But it's also confusing to me from the romance angle. And I think that's because it's dated. Because you've got these two lawyers. I mean, this will continue to see endlessly as two lawyers who are married who end up in the courtroom against each other. Like that is a thing that we're still doing as a not a mute cute, I don't know what you call it, a gimmick or whatever. So that's framing still a device thing. Yeah, but the thing, they don't have kids, which is kind of cool. I actually enjoyed some of their banter, but it's the thing that threw me off was she's very passionate about this feeling that women are not treated equally, and he seems to be putting up with her. And that, the talking with our mom, the progressive thing there is that he's married to her. The progressive thing is that men don't want women like that, but he seems to love her and want to be with her. But he's so condescending, and he never, and that's where it's confusing, because they're lawyers. He's got to put up this argument, he's got to put up this front. I don't know if he's just not agreeing with her just as part of this kind of weird lawyer banter thing they're doing. But it feels very condescending and very like, isn't it nice that strong women can find men that'll love them and put up with them. And it's just like, that rubs me the wrong way. Like, I don't much care for that archetype. Like, the fact, and she's at one point, she gets very passionate, and then she like apologizes to him a bunch. And like, I don't remember him ever apologizing to her in this movie for anything. So that all just like, I hate the false equivalency, but it just felt, it felt like here we had this strong woman character, but still he knows best. Father knows best. They don't have kids, but father knows best.
She also says, I think more than once, am I being too much?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's like in a modern
and he doesn't
sense,
really reassure her.
No, it's like
kind of like, yeah, you are.
It's like in a modern, like, again, this is why it's a historical text and not something I really was found really entertaining or enjoyable in that sense, is that like in a modern movie, I could see that working. I mean, I ask Jill, my girlfriend sometimes, am I being too much? Because I am sometimes.
Right.
And so like you can do that in a way and it works, but the way they do it in the movie, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so it leaves you with this weird taste in your mouth, which is
really
what I think is happening for us. Because like, again, I like the idea that they're actually already married and it's a rom-com. Like that's not, I mean, especially in this era, I think all of them have been unmarried single people who get married by the end of the rom-com, unless I'm misremembering something. And so like, I like the idea of a domestic rom-com. I like the banter that they have. Like, I want to see a modern version of this, and maybe there is somewhere that's, that works more as a rom-com for me. Because like, yeah, there's like, again, the banter, that she's a lawyer, the women, she's taking on a woman's case, like there's all these things that are kind of interesting and could really work, but because the tone is so off and all I've already said, like I still just end up in this weird mushy place.
Well, it feels like, so the point of this movie is we're asking a question, but it doesn't feel like he's asking the question or even thinking about it. And I don't know if I'm misunderstanding it because I don't understand the typical 1949, he's not young, older man. I don't know if there's something, because you miss nuances. I mean, we've talked about, I think Karina Longworth talks about it really well with Hattie McDaniel and that situation where she felt like she was playing these Black maid characters very progressively, but then the next generation comes along and they're like, you're just playing a servant, because they don't really see the nuance because they didn't go through it. And that's just how the world works.
Yeah.
But in this case, I don't know if I'm missing any of the nuance of Spencer Tracy's character and what he's reacting to. So, it's hard to say. I know a lot of people love this movie. It's hard for me to say what I really think about it and whether I'd recommend it or anything like that.
Yeah, well, I'm even looking at the Wikipedia, and it's like it was nominated for that, the AFI stuff, which is just an interesting metric, like anything to look at, and it's number 22 on the AFI's 100 Years, 100 Laughs, and it's like I don't remember what specifically that list is. Maybe it's just for comedies, and I'm like, okay, again, I don't really understand comedies, but it was, it is a movie that's, it was well reviewed at the time. It's still got a good Rotten Tomatoes score. Not that there's a ton of reviews for old movies like these.
I don't think you and I think it's bad.
No, it's just
kind of confused by. I mean, it's not Neptune's Daughter or Monster a Go-Go or anything like that. I think we're just kind of confused by it. Here, if you're on Wikipedia, you see the poster.
Yeah, they're ripping apart a pair of jeans. And
what does it say above?
It's the hilarious answer to who wears the pants.
I mean, so it's just that kind of that kind of thing. And and we're not like, as a society, there are things in this movie that are still happening, like they both are lawyers who work long hours, but she seems to take care of all the housework. Like, I still see that all the time in my own life. Sounds bad, but I mean, in people I know, because I'm in a more progressive relationship. But there are lots of women now who work full-time jobs and still end up taking care of everything at home.
Yeah.
So stuff like that still goes on. But that's the thing with this movie. That wasn't even like, that was a blink and you'll miss it. You won't even notice that that's
Yeah, well, and a part of even, I think I noticed that part, but a part of it is that as I've been growing up, and I don't know if it's true for you too, but like for us specifically, and I'm 31 and you're 37 now, no, 38.
Yes.
38. So we're in our 30s now. That's weird to say out loud. Uh, and like our father was the at-home parent and our mom was
Right.
the one who worked. Now, that is not unheard of in any era past, probably World War II, but it is certainly a lot rarer in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. And like I have hardly any friends. Like I can't name anybody where it's like their dad was the one who was at home taking care of it. Like now I've seen in the 2000 and 2010s with social media more of that happening. But like because of that perspective, I notice sometimes when that happens, and so I do occasionally get confused because they're talking about the chores and the housework, and it's like, oh well, that's just what
Right.
dad did, and I do a lot of the I work. I'm unfortunately my girlfriend doesn't have a job at the moment, but like I still do a lot of the chores. It's not like I'm excluded from that for that reason. And so like watching this movie, it's like again, it's that question where it's like why isn't he doing any of that? So he just comes off as ungrateful because like
Yeah.
she's putting in all that effort and that work, and so it's like, and she has the job, basically the same job.
This almost
Anyways,
feels like when we watch Sound of Metal, where it's like we just come at it from such an odd place that we almost can't evaluate it. And
yeah.
I can't. I found it interesting. I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. I
And
would definitely watch another Spencer Tracy, Katherine Hepburn film out of
oh, totally.
curiosity.
Well,
But
that's the thing. The acting, one of the things that really works in this movie is the acting's pretty great. I even like Tommy Wool's acting. I don't really mind his acting in Seven
yeah,
Rich
there
either. He's
was
a
a
good
little
actor,
bit.
but
I mean, we've been bringing up the problematic issues. The way that it's the poor people kind of being trashy is not a great look for the movie. Judy Holliday and Tom Ewell and his mistress are all clearly poor, and so it's
yeah,
kind of
there's some problematic stuff
it's
there.
it's a
Yeah.
little problematic, but I mean it's an interesting movie. It'll make you think about gender roles and things. It's an odd one for us, so
Yeah, and
I'm not, I don't know. I don't know how I'd recommend it as a rom-com either. I kind of want to watch other Tracy Hepburn, but then again, like you don't want to not recommend something because it's at least it is addressing gender differences, which isn't really something. But then like The Lady Eve was just subversive because it just did what it did without asking questions, kind of a thing. So it's, I don't know.
yeah, I totally, yeah. At the end of it, I'm also kind of like, I would recommend this basically to anyone who was curious about rom-coms from this era. I do kind of get why it's important, at least at a cursory glance. So like, it's not the same as Neptune's Daughter, where like I have to like specifically go out of my way to sort of find the group for it. This is more,
Right.
if you're watching rom-coms and you want to see rom-coms from this era, watch Adam's Rib. It fits in there, and maybe they'll like it in a way that we don't, or understand it in a way that we don't, and really enjoy it. So it's not bad. It's just we had it was an interest that we both had kind of a confusing take on this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I don't really have anything else to say.
that's it for me too.